The Health Fix podcast teaches you how to take charge of your health naturally by giving you the information you need to elevate your health.
Hello there, health junkies. Welcome to another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Krause. In today's episode, I have Christine Forner back on, and we are going to be talking about her technique for meditation for those that have had chronic trauma in their lives and for those suffering with PTSD. So I loved Christine when I had her on episode 202, so definitely check that out. It's all about dissociative disorder and really disconnecting from your body when you become stressed. Now, if you're that kind of person and you struggle with meditation, you definitely want to jump into this podcast as well, because we're going to talk about her special technique for meditation, which, by the way, is quite impressive. And we're going to be talking more about needs and not having our childhood needs met and what that means for us when we get older, what it means for us as we have children and as life progresses. So you definitely don't want to miss this podcast. I highly recommend jumping on in. So let's get to a word from my sponsor and then we'll get into the podcast. Hey, health junkies, want to tell you a little bit about one of my sponsors for the podcast, the High Country Lodge in Breckenridge, Colorado. It is a lodge that can host up to 40 people. They have a beautiful deck that has a great view of multiple mountains. And it has a lovely fireplace where you can cozy up after a day of skiing at Breckenridge. It's not right on the mountain, but you know what? You don't have to be. This place is just beautiful on its own. It's a couple minutes from the mountain, couple minutes to town, and you have access to multiple trails. You can mountain bike, you can ski, you can snowshoe from this location. It's great for year-round recreation. I highly recommend checking out the High Country Lodge. So go to ahighcountrylodge.com and book your next retreat, wedding, just getaway, family reunion. It's a great place for multiple things, and I highly recommend it. Go check it out. All right, everybody, I've got Christine Forner back on today, and we're going to be talking about creative meditation for dissociative disorders. Whew. I tried to say that a couple times with Christine before the podcast started, and I was hoping my tongue didn't get too twisted there. But that's why we have you on the podcast to help me with this. And your meditation technique that you created, I have a lot of folks that have asked since our first podcast all about the technique, and they've been dying to hear about it. So Let's jump in and talk about, first and foremost, how did this technique come about? And let's remind folks about why it's difficult to regularly meditate in the formal sense of meditation for a lot of folks that are prone to dissociating, yes.
So I think when most people start to meditate, we hear that it's really good for us. We hear that it's, changes not only the structure or not only the function, but the structure of the brain, which not very many things actually change the structure of the brain per se in adulthood. Exercise can do that. Changing our repeated patterns or habits can do it. But meditation seems to actually help grow the gray matter, which is, in other words, if we were to look at the brain like muscles, just like everything else, there are muscles that are we're supposed to use all of the muscles of our brain. And when we're traumatized, some large muscles are unable to work properly. Mm-hmm. And those large muscles are primarily muscles that are designed for relating in a one step removed objective kind of way.
Gotcha.
So for us humans, right, we have primitive reptilian and mammalian brains in us that work and function like primitive reptilian brains, right? So we have the basic body digestion. We have the basic neurobiology of any other living, breathing animal that takes in food and reproduces. Then we also have that reptilian brain or the mammalian brain, which is about how to bond to another thing without seeing it as food or dangerous, right? So that reptilian brain doesn't really have that capacity. It can't really differentiate unless the female is in a reproductive state. Then the lizards only come together when they're reproducing, and then they spend the rest of their time mostly apart. This is most reptiles, not all, but most. And there's a brain structure that helps them realize that the thing that's close to them isn't trying to eat them, or they aren't going to eat. And that's when they're reproducing. Mammals have it a little bit different, particularly the more pack the animal is versus more singular the mammal is. The more pack it is, the more there's these brain structures that help us not only hang out with other creatures, but nurse and tend to and care for other creatures. So for mammals, there are brain structures that help us, that will help the mom take care of the baby as if the baby is an extension of herself. So for all mammals, all their resources go into that infant for the first, for most mammals, I think the max that they're extending energy is about 4 years.
Wow.
So that female mom and or dad or whoever the combination of is tending to that infant 100% for about a year or two until they're dependent or independent enough to manage life on their own. Humans are a completely different mammal, even though we're the same mammal. So we have these two brain structures inside of us. And so not only do we have to learn how to live with each other and be in proximity of each other, but actually humans have evolved so that other humans are the thing that make us us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't become us on our own. We actually die on our own. We are not an independent creature in any way, shape, or form. So we have a thinking brain, the lower brain structures, which are sort of our emergency hardwired brain structures. And then we have a relating brain. And this relating brain is intended to regulate ourselves so that we can tell the difference between being in danger and being scared.
Okay.
Animals can't tell the difference. If they're scared, they're in danger. But for humans, because of the way that our memory works, because of the way that we add information as we go, like in reading and in writing, all of the stuff that happens in the primary years is sort of that foundation of who we're going to turn out to be. And so you need these big muscles to be able to regulate our fear in order to relate to other people, because our relating turns off when we go into our primitive brain structures. And what the relating brain is it's sort of there to help us override that so that we can stay grounded and in the present moment if our offspring go off. And when our offspring are young, they're going off all the time, right? They move into the emergent states all the time. So this relating brain is really in charge of regulating our bodies. So being able to move us, and in theory, like if you take a look at the Dalai Lama, because he spends all of his time up in this relating brain, and he was surrounded by a bunch of other relating brains who meditate all the time. In theory, he can go in and probably help and assist with his digestion. In theory, we should have enough internal awareness that we can tell if our blood pressure is high or not. We should be able, we can manage our blood pressure, manage our heart rate, manage our digestion. We should be able to have a semblance of control over that with these brain structures. They're also in charge of helping us relate emotions. Emotions are part of our affective circuitry system. So our inside our bodies, we have our felt sense perception, which is really from those back brains, as well as our limbic system, which is our emotional brain system. And emotions are what we label the felt sense. So affect is what we label. The label of it is software. The affect itself is hardware. And it's the relating brain that helps us put words, meaning, and context to our inner world. And this is the job of a parent in those first 3 to 5 years of life. And that's the brain structure that is in charge of meditating, is the brain structure that does this. So in theory, we should be able to manage every single emotion that we have. It means that we should be able to stay present while we're grieving. We should be able to stay present while we're afraid. We should be able to think from sort of a mindful place while we're in these places of terror. And that's the exercising of that brain structure that happens with mindfulness or secure attachments. They both work in the same way.
I see.
It does a lot of other things. It's in charge of intense amount of empathy. So empathy is not just feeling bad for other people. It's a continuous loop where I can feel what I feel, tap into another human being, feel what they feel, and then that loop comes back to me and I'm affected by how they feel, and then my loop goes back to them, right? This is what a parent is supposed to be doing in how you get it right for a creature who cannot speak, for a creature who doesn't have language, but still has all the sophisticated affective and sensory information that we do all throughout our life. Does that make sense?
It does. And now I have like 400 questions, and I have one that's to the front of my thought process.
Okay, I'll answer those questions to clarify.
Yeah. In terms of empathy, one of the things that I started to think about was we have a lot of folks who are self-described empathetic. And in that sense, would you say that people that are more empathetic might have had some miscommunication signals with mom? When mom was raising them, or was mom extremely empathetic and kind of helped create how this person is in terms of things? I think I'm trying to get to the point of that. A lot of folks I see that struggle with chronic pain and
are calling themselves an empath.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that is actually a misnomer.
Okay. Good to know.
What that really is these are people who can feel things but do not know how to regulate it properly.
Aha.
So regulating means tending to it.
Okay.
Right? So you have a sensation inside of you. That sensation is it's a talking. It's a request. It's a form of communication. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I'm sleepy. I'm bored. I'm da 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 da. It all comes through sensory information.
Okay.
And that gets put into affect. So feelings. Mm-hmm. And then if people were saying that they're an empath, they can feel feelings, we should, in theory, be able to go in and tend to and take care of those feelings, and those feelings go away, right? Because feelings are an ask.
Okay.
We don't ask for things we don't need as humans, right? I think I mentioned this last time. If you have an empty bladder, you're not walking around thinking, my bladder is sufficiently empty. We just don't think about things that we need. So if you have a bunch of emotions inside and they're not going anywhere, or you don't know how to calm them down, or you don't know how to communicate to them, or you don't know how to ride it out without flipping into a place of panic, pain, suffering, terror, the pain, the suffering, the panic, and the terror, that's your emergency response system.
Mm-hmm.
And that emergency response system is saying, I either need to move away from danger, move towards safety, or I need to be in relational proximity. What gets challenging is if in those early years that relational proximity got bunged up somehow, if it wasn't safe, or if you had a parent who was unavailable, you stop asking, right? And then you start to dissociate.
Okay.
You start to dissociate that pain and suffering that comes from not having our needs met. It works the exact same way as hunger. It works the exact same way as thirst. It works the exact same way as anything else, like having to go to the bathroom. If you feel physical pain, there's something wrong. And if it's typically chronic pain, research is showing that it is actually related to relational emptiness or relational needs that aren't being met. It's a baby body asking for attention, care, support, safety, security, and it's not coming. And I know when I start talking about this, people start to go, oh my God, we're all traumatized. Yes, we are. We all are. Nobody's escaping this. I've met one person in my life who I know has sort of escaped this, but then she walked out of her front door into a world that's very, very traumatized, a little or a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So these front brain structures, these mindful brain structures, they don't work when we're scared. It's not very good to be empathetic to a tiger. It's not very good to be attuned to a beast that is chasing you. You're going to die quickly if that happens. So these brain structures get shut off or cut off when we become more and more frightened. So the more that we need something and that need isn't being met, the higher there is a chance that we start to dissociate. We start to move into these emergency response systems because it's an anesthetic. It's numbing the pain, and pain is an ask.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Emotions, they are an ask. What the mindful brain does is it learns how to spat language, and it's a higher way of being. I don't know if you've ever known anybody who meditates on a regular basis. They're very, very compassionate, typically. They're very calm, typically. They're very empathic and attuned. And, their ego is a little less because their ego oftentimes is a missing need from childhood.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting. But it makes sense. I mean,
it makes perfect sense. And so when you start to look at what happens when we dissociate, these brain structures that are designed to know what we know and feel what we feel, most people who are dissociated, they have material inside of them that they don't really want to feel or can't feel because it's too much or too painful or too difficult, to things that they don't really want to know. Because bonding is our highest form of safety and security. We bond to our caregivers no matter what. It never fails. You have people telling of these stories, these pretty horrific stories, and they're talking to them like they're pretty casual stories. Like, oh yeah, I was left alone as a child all the time. It was great. It was fantastic. The parts of them that are pained by that or lonely by that are being dissociated. And when we start to meditate, that information starts to creep in. And if you have a chronic dissociation, it doesn't creep in. It comes in hard and fast. And it's information that the system just can't comprehend yet. It also can't feel yet because it hasn't had a chance to build those muscles. So it's kind of like asking somebody to run an Ironman in a day without any training, right? If you're going to do an Ironman, you got to spend a year training at least, and you got to mind your food. You got to mind what you do, and you've got to pay attention to everything. People who are doing these triathlons, they've been training for a long, long time. And it's just like when people are learning to meditate, the more injury that you've had in the past, the more aloneness you've had in the past, the longer your journey is going to be. But it is the same as an Ironman. If you work on it every day, you can finish it. You can actually heal from a lot of this stuff because of this brain structure.
Wow.
That's inside each of us that grows and develops when we meditate.
That's awesome. I think that's something that a lot of us don't think about, that we're growing inside when we're meditating. I think a lot of people are like, we're just chilling. And for many people's case, in terms of the patients I see with a lot of chronic pain, a lot of chronic illness, their biggest complaint is, I go to meditate and I can't. And right. So I think a lot of people were dying to know by having you back on, okay, so what exactly, as you were saying, it's like, these are some painful things to kind of bring up in the brain. So they're like, what's going on in my brain? Is it like a ping pong? Is it, what's happening?
Lots of things. It could be so many things, right? Because those front brain structures are really in charge of 9 different functions. What I said, regulating fear, regulating emotions, updating our procedural learning. So, 2 feet of water was terrifying when we're little. 2 feet of water shouldn't be terrifying when you're old. But if there's trauma, things that scared you as a child is going to scare you as an adult because it hasn't been updated by those brain structures. It's in charge of taking a mental pause, right? It's the brain structure that goes, what is going on here? Where those back brain structures do not ever take pauses and they go very quickly. It's in charge, as I said, of empathy. It's in charge of attunement. So there's a bunch of brain structures in the front part of our brain. The polyvagal theory really explains a lot of this stuff, where those front brain structures can feel what other people feel. Like literally we can feel. And this is supposed to be in everybody, men and women, by the way. And men, by the way, little boys are actually born with more empathy at birth than female babies.
Interesting.
And little boys find being neglected far more damaging in those first 3 years of life than little girls. Little girls have a little bit more, and I'm talking about like seconds and milliseconds, but little girls can sort of entertain themselves a little bit more than little boys can at this day and age in our history of what we're studying. Was it like this 50,000 years ago? I don't know, because of epigenetic underpinnings. But when we study what's going on with female babies and male babies respond to other babies crying quicker than female babies, so they're more affected by what's going on around them. And they also get much more upset, much more faster if the parent isn't paying attention. And this is something you can look at called the still face experiment by a man named Ed Tronick. And he does all these experiments where the mom is engaged with the baby and talking with the baby, and then the mom goes totally still. And within moments, the baby's dysregulated. Within moments, the baby's starting to get upset. And males get more upset than females. So males need far more attention in the first years of life in little girls. And I'm not, we're talking infants, right? So 2 drops of milk is very powerful for an infant. It's not so powerful for an adult. So in infant time, where I'm talking about, like, a baby girl might be able to entertain herself for 20 seconds by themselves, where little boys are instantly getting upset. So males are supposed to be as empathetic as females. There's no difference in their brain structure. It's socially. We have socially made our boys very narcissistic. And that's that man code, right? You're supposed to be incredibly independent. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to feel. You're not supposed to have emotions. Emotions are a waste of time, or they're weak. That's not true. There's nothing inside a male brain that shows this. So this attunement and this empathy, men are supposed to have this as well. Then there's it's in charge of introspection or introception, being able to go inside your body and being able to feel what it is and put it in the right meaning and the right label. So we know the difference between thirst and hunger, or sad, or bored, or all the millions of different combinations of things that happen inside of our bodies. It's also in charge of understanding the difference between instinct and intuition. And so intuition is sort of a way that we communicate without each other, without words and language. It's this feeling we're being watched, a feeling that somebody's upset, this noticing of something that isn't sort of a tangible piece of information. The front brain is in charge of this. And it's also in charge of, they call it morality. I'm not a fan of that word because of the religious connotations that go with this word. But really, if you can feel what this person next to you feels, and you know that they feel that, and you can feel that as well, it's really kind of altruistic to make sure other people are happy and other people are safe. And that's what that brain structure does. So when we start to meditate, what I'm really trying to help people do is not necessarily focus on that mindfulness. Mindfulness usually starts with breath, and then gets people sort of to sit inside themselves, doing body scans inside themselves, noticing what's happening and just letting it go. This is something that traumatized people just can't do. Right? When they sit still, they'll start to feel what they feel. Their minds are going to start taking them away. The thinking brain, when the body is traumatized, tends to be an overused muscle. It's like a really weak, it's like using the pinky finger instead of the whole hand. And it's an overused pinky finger. So thinking is not such a great thing for us, even though it's been touted as being the most amazing thing ever. I'm not sure that it is. And I'm pretty sure that if we weren't traumatized, we probably never would have made it to the moon. But that's a different story.
That's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast. So even when you get people to breathe, it opens up the insula, but it also gets people more aware of their body. And you've got to think about traumatized people with dissociative disorders and really complex dissociative disorders or chronic pain. They're likely dealing with like profound abandonment or profound parentlessness, profound motherlessness or profound fatherlessness, or really you can get into deep things like incest, things like domestic violence. These are incredibly traumatic things that hurt a great deal. So when you get people to sit in their body, all of that feeling of shame and or disgust and or terror and or, these awful, awful feelings come flooding up, and nobody wants to sit in that. So when we ask people to sit in that meditative place, already people can be triggered. When we ask them to take a breath, they can already be triggered. When we invite them into their bodies to do a body scan, that can be hugely triggering. So I tend to stay away from those things, and I just try to exercise those brain structures. So the first thing that I will do is when somebody walks in and we start working on a meditative practice is I begin to get them to just put a little bit of tactile pressure, basically touching the front part of their forehead where their nose and their forehead touches. So there's a little divot there. And for really, really, really traumatized people, this is all the body can tolerate, because it's sort of, I suspect, and I've tested a little bit with an EEG machine, I think it starts to actually activate the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is the brain structure we're talking about.
Wow.
And so I don't know if anybody wants to just sit there for a minute and touch that front part of their face and just notice what happens to your breath or your muscle tension in the face. You can actually slow things down a little. That's when I have really sensitive systems. This is where I start. The next step I will go to, if they can tolerate that, is I'll put an object on there. I have a bunch of crystals in my office, but I just think it's funny that my therapist tells me to put crystals on my forehead. You can use a rock, you can use a coin, you can use anything that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it really starts to get the person to pay attention to this front part of their face. Because a lot of things start to be activated and engaged. Then if they can sit there and feel that front part of their face, typically the intuitive awareness starts to kick in a little bit. The capacity to be a bit more aware of things differently starts to kick in. So when this is being pushed, they might notice that breathing is a little bit easier.
Wow.
Okay. And once they're able to handle that without getting triggered or upset, and so some people might run through this really quite quickly. The next thing I'll do is I'll introduce, you can get all sorts of apps on your phone, is either a glow stick app or a candle flame app. Now, the reason why I give two options is because sometimes when a lot of people there's some people who are hurt as children where candles play a pretty predominant role, or people who come from maybe very, very religious backgrounds. Using candles can be kind of triggering for some people. So then I offer glow sticks because, glow sticks are something that aren't typically used in traumatizing events. And so what the candle flame does in the phone and what the glow stick does is it gives enough light without hurting the eyes to give an after image that burns in the front part of their head. So they look at the image of the flame, close their eyes. If they can't close their eyes, a soft gaze is fine. And seeing the after image of that candle flame at that front part of the head, right where that procerus muscle is. That's that place that's right between the divot of the forehead and the nose. That's where the focus of all the stuff that we're doing. If they can hold a candle flame image or a glow stick image, I'll get them to practice it for 1 minute a day, 2 minutes a day. Sometimes if they're having a hard time seeing it, I'll invite them to go to maybe a little bit of a darker room so that the contrast is a little bit sharper so that they can see focusing on that image. And I'll request or invite them to sit at it for 1 minute or 2 every day. So they'll look at it. And if they can't see the image, because some people can't see, that part of their imagination doesn't work the same, just keep at it. It will show up. You go in a darker room, it will show up because it's part of an after image. And so you're just turning on those brain structures and getting them used to. So this is the equivalent of walking every day. If your goal is to run a marathon, we're getting out and walking every single day. But it's enough that you can tolerate the distance. So if you can't walk around the block, then we're just going to do half the block and back. And the next day we're going to do and then we're going to move up after you can do that half block. Okay. Then we move up to and add something a little bit more. So the next thing I do after they can hold that image for 1 minute or 2 is see if they can hold it for 5 minutes.
Wow.
See if they can hold it for 10 minutes. So a lot of times people can actually hold it for a good couple minutes. And then it goes away. So they'll open their eyes, look at the image again of the flame on their phone or the glow stick on their phone, close their eyes and watch it again. Watch that flame up in that mind's eye, up in that front part where the procerus is. After that, I start making the image a little bit more complex. So a lot of times I'll invite them to write an image that they find neutral or pleasant. Neutral's pretty good. So, I'll hand draw a rainbow. I'll hand draw a cat or a dog, and I can't draw to save my life, but I use different colors and pretty clear shapes so that they can look at that image, close their eyes, and see the image in the front part of that head and hold a more complex image for up to 10 minutes.
Wow.
Once they've reached that level, then I'll make the image a bit more complex. And then after that, I'll make the image even more complex. There's a beautiful image of this thing called Rainbow Unicorn Butterfly Kitten. I'm going to repeat that again. You guys all Google it. Mm-hmm. Rainbow Unicorn Butterfly Kitten. It is one of the most outstanding images I've ever seen because it's so complex and so whimsical. And, there's so many different things to look at and then hold those details in the mind's eyes. That's actually quite an advanced capacity for that front brain. And typically, if you can actually start seeing and holding those complex images, the front brain structure is just going to start working, and you're going to notice that in your life, other things will start working. So in therapy, if I'm working with people, they'll, at this stage, when they can start holding this image, they actually start to be able to comprehend themselves in a different way. They have a bit more empathy for themselves, a little bit more compassionate for themselves. They're a little bit more objective. They can sort of catch when they're getting triggered a little bit better.
Wow.
After that, then I start doing guided meditations.
Okay.
If I do introduce breath, I'm getting them to focus on an image of breath. Mm-hmm. So right around when the image starts getting more complex, I'll start introducing a colored mist or a colored energy or a colored air, depending on what does not trigger people. So as I'm doing this, I'm talking to people all the time. What triggers you? What doesn't trigger you? What's pleasant? What's not pleasant? Because I'm going with the most benign and or pleasant image that we can find collaboratively.
Wow. And
so, yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Is there anything to the colors that come up, or that you suggest, or is it just, just because colors are connected to different healing things, and in Chinese medicine, colors are different for different channels. But in this is just colors are colors, as long as
colors are colors. Whatever color pops in, like, what's your favorite color today? What color do you want to use today? As if their eyes are closed and they're breathing in, I'll get them to breathe in a colored mist that they fill up their sinus cavities. So if I'm getting them to breathe, I get them to focus on filling their sinus cavities as full as they will go through their nose, and then blowing out like they're blowing a feather or a candle, like a birthday cake candle, whatever is the easiest for that person to tolerate in their imagery. So it's a nice gentle blow where they're making the feather billow a little bit. And then they breathe in another time, filling up their sinus cavities. And then as we're moving along, I want to start introducing the body. So right around the time that they can start handling sort of the rainbow, unicorn, butterfly, kitten, those more complex images, that's when I'll start introducing breathing the colored air in through their nose. And then I'll invite them to blow out, but drop into their body. So I'll encourage them to drop their awareness to their body on the out breath. And almost everybody I work with can actually feel the felt feeling of when they do that. The muscles will release. There'll be, some people will describe it as warmth or space or muscles relaxing, because really the body drives the train with everything. We can trace all of our thinking to our body's sensations and the learned vocabulary and words that go with those sensations. You're looking at me like,
I have like 400 ideas, of course. So I'm like thinking, okay, so muscle tension messages, as I always talk to patients, like muscle tension is sending messages to your brain that something's not right.
Yes.
That you should be afraid, that you should be scared, that you're stressed. Even though for a lot of people, they're like, no, I'm not stressed at all. I have no idea what's happening. And you're like, well, you clearly have shoulders that are now creating earrings for you, but there's something going on.
Yeah. So but that was probably a body posture that they have been holding since they were little. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't know what the difference is, right? Like, I only speak English. I do not know. I know a couple of words in Ukrainian, but a lot of that language, when I hear it, I'm not comprehending anything because I've never been exposed to it. And it's the same with if our bodies have been in a particular defensive posture or a passive posture for a really long time, that's their normal. So they won't know.
Wow. So it's like telling people like that you can't distinguish. If it's been for so long, you can't distinguish between what would be stress and what wouldn't. They're just like, yeah. This is me.
And a lot of times when you get them to breathe in through their nose and breathe out and go into their body, that's when they can feel it. Okay. They can feel sort of that sudden shift or that sudden change. And that in itself can be alarming to people whose body has been in a defensive posture for a really long time, saving itself, right? If it thinks that the ears up and the elbows is safe and you move it, that all of a sudden they're going to make the assumption, well, this isn't safe. So safe doesn't feel safe sometimes. Safe is new and it feels weird.
Right.
And if you've been scared your whole life, you're just going to make the assumption that it's something else scarier.
And so perhaps this could be why with acupuncture or massage or cupping or any body therapy, someone might relax a little bit, but then boom, like 5 minutes walking out there, the body's like back again.
Mm-hmm. Because it's protecting itself and it's learned that's how I am in this world. And the front meditation, what it seems to do is it seems to help people be able to really focus on, like it's sort of going in the back door, and it's using imagination, which a lot of people who dissociate, imagination is their strong suit. Mm-hmm. But you're using that imagination in a different brain structure that's actually designed to tend to ourselves and other people.
Okay.
So after we can get them to hold the image, I'll do all sorts of things. Like then I'll start taking them all over the world, and we'll follow rainbow unicorn butterfly kitten to a trip to San Francisco, or we'll go to Egypt, and then you can just spend a long time doing, I did one for a group of people on Saturday where I took them to go find a past mother inside of them, transferred through epigenetic information, who was the perfect mother. And so some people had to go back 50,000 years. Some people only had to go back a couple generations. Some people were lucky enough to have one here. But it's taking people into a space where they can feel safe in their body and have an image that goes with it that might not be related to anything that they experience today.
Wow.
So the sky becomes the limit when you start to use your imagination in meditation. And I tend to always have music on in the background. Mostly because it's taking some of the edge off of the abruptness that people can feel if they spend time in their, like if they're going in to meditate and they're not comfortable in their body, the music can take some of the edge off. Mm-hmm. It can be a little bit relaxing. So I always use, sometimes I don't have people sitting. If they want to like feel comfortable wrapped up like a cocoon, like a burrito, I will wrap people up in a burrito because that might be the safety that they need. Because we can't meditate well if we're not safe.
Right. And I think that's a big factor to think about, because a lot of times folks will go, and I'm curious about how you do your group sessions, because I think a lot of folks will go, say, to yoga, right? And at the end of yoga, everyone lays down on their mat in Shavasana. And then there's this little period of like, okay, now we're going to go into our little meditative state. But if you have any trauma around crowds or multiple people in a room and being exposed, I can see how this would bring some things up for sure. And, just in general. So curious, how do your groups work? How does it look that folks are trying to imagine, like, okay, you're taking people through this journey. How does it look? How does it?
Well, with clients, I just do one-on-one. I don't do group meditations with clients. This was a group of therapists.
Okay.
So I'm making the assumption that they have enough agency inside of them that they can manage all of this. The ones, and that at the beginning, I just say, if you don't like this, just stay with the thing that you like. Mm-hmm. If this is too much, don't do it. Right. So I did give people a little bit of warning that this is going to be a meditation where we're going to be talking about mother and mother love. And for a lot of people, because of the misogynistic patriarchal world that we live in, there's a lot of mixed feelings people have about mothering. Like it's sort of just even the notion of mothering gets labeled as being so much more less than what it is, or really twisted on what it is, mm-hmm. right? That human mother should really be like all other mammal mothers, incredibly protective and supplying their infant with all of the resources that parent can provide. Mm-hmm. But what's supposed to happen with humans is that we supposed to have 2 or 3 or 4 other people backing us up.
Like a tribe.
Our neurobiology is designed for, it's probably 1 baby per 4 adults is how we were 50,000 years ago, 4 or 5 adults. And those adults were helping the mom, because a human infant is so much more dependent for such a long time that we kind of really need those 3 or 4 or 5 people around us for, it's not just 2 or 3 or 4 years like all the other mammals. It's like 20, 25 years, because that's how long it takes the human brain to grow.
I would agree. I think sometimes maybe it might even take 40 plus in some cases. I'm like, I'm just starting to discover myself. But in the case of moms, because this is sometimes where I see ladies start to struggle with their issues in terms of all the trauma comes back up, things they've suppressed for many years. The pain comes back up, especially around postpartum in particular is when I see a lot of stuff coming up for ladies. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I can, because I do question. See, the thing about that we don't ask anybody when they're in this postpartum state is, how is your attachment system? Mm-hmm. How were you raised? How were your relational needs met? How was your mom able to stay with you? Because for a lot of people, I don't think it's postpartum. I think it's a post-traumatic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing that psychiatry and psychology still have really a hard time, and psychiatry even a little bit more than psychology, is the absolute impact and intensity human attachment and human bonding really is. Mm-hmm. All the pains that we feel as adults, we feel those things as infants and children. Mm-hmm. Right? If you've ever had that moment where you're bawling your eyes out, or you're in your shower, or wherever you are, and you're experiencing a bunch of just internal turmoil, there's a really good chance that comes from when you were a baby or a child. And when we give birth, because our world, you take a look at what the instructions of what to do with babies in the 50s and 60s, they were kept away from their parents. They were put into incubators. The mom had to feed the baby every 4 hours and nothing in between, because you'd be spoiling a baby. You've got a generation of people who are going to have an attachment disorder because of that. And then they go have their baby. And, I was fortunate enough when I had my 3 babies. I myself have quite a high trauma. I have an ACE score of 9, actually, which is a very high trauma score. But the first time I nursed my child, I felt something I'd never felt in my life. And it was just profound love and adoration for this little creature. Like, all of my mommy instincts came, and I rolled with them. I started nursing my baby, and we know a woman named Kathleen Kendall Tackett does studies on the immune system and trauma. And she has shown that nursing can reorganize the body to learn to teach it how to regulate it again. So for a lot of nursing moms, they can start to become regulated for the very first time.
Wow.
Because it's so, all of the regulation hormones, the dopamine, the opioid, and the natural, you got dopamine, oxytocin, and natural opioids that get excreted in the breast milk. These are calming, zenning, loving, bonding chemicals that flood the mother and flood the child. If you've never really had those chemicals in that sort of dose, it can be shocking to a system. It can be grieving to a system. And you might not even know what you're grieving about. And so that's why I think with postpartum depression, I think we've got it really wrong in what we're describing what it is, because it's missing the whole attachment piece and how vital it is to bond.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because that makes so much sense, because I've played with, I don't have any children of my own, but I've played with oxytocin sprays just to see, because I am the experimental one here. I will do anything just so I know what my patients might experience, of course, within reason. But I tried oxytocin. I was like, whoa, this is weird. And so I can imagine that having the flood of so many different feelings. But now I'm also thinking beyond that. Now, what about moms who are pumping so much? Are they missing out on that? And could there also be a little bit of, I got this high, and now I don't have that high because I'm pumping? Does that have?
I don't know. I haven't read a lot of studies. That one I don't know. But I would, sort of anecdotally, I would think that it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to be with those babes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for at least 2 years. And they're never supposed to leave our side. And in our day and age, most women are like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that in my career. I couldn't be there, and it would drive me nuts. But 50,000 years ago, you think about, and most of our human history and our evolution took, we've sort of been humans for about 300,000 years. And before that, we were many iterations of creatures who tended to their young in a very long time. The sort of the hominids have been around for 2-3 million years, something like that. So it's been a long time that we've had this ability to tend to our young for a really long time. It's just that 50,000 years ago, there'd be lots of other people helping you.
Yes.
So all you had to worry, like, they would be helping changing the baby, and they would be, most moms in a lot of countries, if you think about leaving a child alone, like in, say, South America or Africa or Australia, right, out in the wild, it's silly to leave an infant alone. We would never, ever, 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 ever do that in these places. And somehow we think it's okay to do it in Western cultures, when it's actually quite traumatizing to the infant too.
Well, that leads to more things, thinking about like, okay, mom's working, so child goes to daycare, now you've got other caregivers, but not the same connection. Or in cases of moms, and when I look at my moms who struggle the most, it's moms without support. Family lives in another state, they're by themselves. Wow. And whose parents are deceased. Also, I've seen some of the worst.
Yeah. And this mindful brain is really supposed to be super activated when we are first giving our birth and having babies. A lot of moms around 7-month mark will start saying that they have pregnancy brain. I don't think it's pregnancy brain. I think it's 100% mindful brain. Their system is just concerned with its body and being inside, so that it can really jack up its capacity to feel the infant's needs, right? Because moms are in charge of filling in the blanks of what the baby's sensations and affect are. Yeah. The moms fill those words in. And so if the mom itself isn't around enough, some of those words get missing, some of those things get missing. And we don't live in a world like our policies. I don't know any country, there's some maybe Nordic countries they're doing better job than other countries, but there's no real great country that has a system set up that if you want to take care, if you want to have children, we don't have great places for children to go to if you want to be able to work and have children. Daycare workers, childcare workers have typically the lowest amount of education and the lowest amount of training. These things aren't, the pay is really terrible.
Yeah.
We're a society that is doing everything it can to not do what it's supposed to do. And it's making it mothering hard. And then you start getting into the other stuff like domestic violence, and you get into sexual assault and incest and all that sort of stuff, which is just this snowball of patriarchy and misogyny that makes a lot of people think that their chronic pain is because there's something wrong with their body, instead of, no, your body's probably actually responding perfectly how it's supposed to in this environment where there's no support for human relationships or tending to our young.
That was said perfectly. And I want everyone to listen to that, rewind, listen again, because that's something profoundly important to really acknowledge. Because I have a lot of people that'll come into my office and be like, "Doc, my body's falling apart. My health is down the tubes," and physiologically they're going, "Well, I kept going to my doctor and my labs come back fine, and everyone tells me it's all in my head and there's nothing wrong." Well, no, no. Your body's responding. We just have to figure about how we work up here.
And we don't question the tests. We don't question that medicine is there's a very small lens of people who are participating in medicine. Mm-hmm. These are high achieving, typically male, typically, people who, are we asking our docs, what kind of attachment style do you have? Do you have an avoidant attachment style? Narcissism. Narcissism is something that is 100% created by the environment that we've got. There's nothing natural about narcissism in human nature, except for when you injure a bunch of people, males in particular, but you can have a narcissistic female where their needs aren't met. This is what happens when a human being's needs aren't met. So we're really topsy-turvy and upside down, and we have a lot of things that are seen as normal, but they're not normal. Mm-hmm. They're a trauma response that's attempted to be normalized or has been normalized when it's not. Like crying is one of the healthiest things we can do. The neurochemistry when we're safe and crying is cleansing.
Mm-hmm.
People who have access to tears, you're in a far better position than to people who have difficulty with their tears, like can't find their tears. Tears is a super, super, super healthy thing in a relating environment.
What else is super healthy in addition to tears? What about screaming, yelling, like not, just kind of letting things out? I don't mean at other people.
If we're mindful, so if we have that mindful brain on, whilst we are experiencing our traumatic experiences, which is challenging, to be safe and vulnerable at the same time is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Because like in our world, we're supposed to have a lot of people around us who are safe, who help us in our vulnerability. But now so few of us have people around us who are safe. We've got to figure out how to be safe with our own vulnerability. And that's really, really challenging, but it's not impossible. Going inside into your body and learning how, like if you have an urge to scream, sometimes if you just make like the and feel the vibration in the voice, mm-hmm. that's enough for the body to go, I can scream now. And that can be very satisfying. If you want to, a lot of people want, being angry, want to punch. If you focus on what it feels like to move your arm in that direction in a mindful way, it can appease the impulse to protect oneself. And then you sort of change the story. Instead of, I can't protect myself, I've never been allowed to protect myself, you can actually have the experience of protecting yourself without having to punch anybody, without having to be overtly violent, or you can do it very internally. So there's lots of things that we can do. Shaking is also another incredibly healthy thing for human body to do.
Ooh, I want to talk about shaking for a second.
Okay.
Because sometimes, yeah, go ahead and explain what you mean.
So if anybody goes and Googles leopard, baboon, impala, you're going to see a picture of an impala. It looks very dead. It's not dead. Trust me, it's not very dead. It looks really dead, dead, but it's not. So the leopard has captured and caught this impala. Some baboons and hyenas chase the leopard away, and the impala starts to shake. And if you watch its eyes, it has this, it's vibrating, like it's frothing at the mouth and moving and vibrating. And it does this until the neurochemistry of the chase is gone, until the neurochemistry of the emergent system is gone, burnt off, and then it'll do this little shake, and then it'll get up and run, and it'll be fine. People who take care of animals know that animals need to do this in order to move forward. Humans, we stop that shaking. Yeah. And it stays in the body. And so when people start to get PTSD and they start to shake, they think that's a bad sign. It's actually a good sign. It needs to happen, but we have to have somebody around us, or we have to convince ourselves somehow that we are safe while our body does this autonomic thing. So it can be really freaky because you're not in control of your body when it's doing this, but it is so healthy. That sweat, that burning off, burns off the neurochemistry and or the neuroelectricity of our fight, flight, freeze systems. So they're incredibly healthy. And if we can do it safe enough, it takes minutes, 5 to 7 minutes typically. So a lot of times, instead of having a PTSD that will always start and then we stop it, this is like a roller coaster. You just ride out that vulnerable place. And if you are feeling safe enough, your system will just burn this off like it can with tears.
Interesting. Because I do see people that'll come in and they've got a shake that is coming about as a result of something that's triggered them. But I also have a lot of people, and myself included, in terms of I feel a shake. I'm not shaking, but I feel my body shaking from the inside out. And I know a lot of people have also described this when they're feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Could this be possibly the same thing?
Maybe. It might be. For you in particular, next time you feel that shake, maybe go to yourself in the mirror and look it in your eyes and say, it's okay. I'm going to trust my body. I'm going to trust this. I'm going to let it do what it wants to do. I'm going to trust this. I'm going to see this as a good thing, even though I'm scared, right? So you're looking and keeping yourself safe and calm, saying like, it's okay. That's that mindful brain being, it's okay. It's calm. This is normal. Good body, good body, good body, good body, good body. You might be able to shake it out. I've had to do it myself too. I actually did it during my divorce, which was, I didn't have the greatest divorce in the world. I had to leave during some part of the discussion, and I had to go do this discharge, and I was looking in my lawyer's eyes and saying, okay, this is going to look really weird, but just stay with me. And I just shook it out, and then I got to be clear again. And then we went back in and I was fine. I didn't carry that terror inside my body. It was able to leave, and I was able to be clear-headed again.
Wow. That's really cool. I think we need to share that with more folks about that too. So let's bring everything kind of full circle here. We talked about what's going on in the brain. We talked about the meditation technique. And then we talked about all kinds of different things that might happen to the body in terms of stress response and PTSD, et cetera, and trauma. Now, once someone has gone through, say, a meditation and gone through this process, what are their next steps? 'Cause it sounds like it takes some time, and every single person is individual. It might take, months to years. And I know you were kind of saying before that at a minimum, we're looking somewhere between 3 and 6 months to really make some.
But the more that you do this, the more your tolerance level is going to increase. You're going to find that the edges start to soften in your life, typically. Meditation and that mindful brain, or that it's the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the default mode network. Like there's quite a few brain structures that are involved in this, but the stronger they get, the more you're going to find yourself just a little bit more content with life, a little bit more empathic, a little bit more kinder, a little bit more patient, a little bit more tolerant of you, yourself, and everybody else around you. This is something we can teach to kids. We don't have to teach them mindfulness because kids don't have a mind yet. So that's something really important, but we can teach them to be still, and we can teach them to be curious about their bodies, curious of what this sensation feels like, curious about, what it's like you said, kids don't experience anxiety, they experience tummy aches and that kind of stuff. And a lot of this, if you practice and you rub your child's front part of their face, or you put a little stuffy on the front part of their face and they have to hold it there, it's going to teach them to be calm, where they can start to breathe. So this is something that the whole family can actually use because it's part of being human.
I love it. So we got to tell folks again about your book. And I know last time you were like, oh, I don't want to promote this, but I think it's really important for folks to have access to your book, know where to find you, because you're in Calgary. So folks who are in Canada, Christina's in Calgary. You can actually go to see her in an office. But for those of you that are in the States, we've got books, we've got other resources because you're involved in an international society. So tell folks a little bit about this society that you're involved in and the group.
So I'm the immediate past president of the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. And this is an organization. We're 37, maybe almost 38 years old. This is we are the oldest organization, and probably the only organization that has really dealt with every kind of abuse. There is no type of abuse that we say, no, we don't cover that, or we deal with the hardest and the most complex and the most difficult situations. And I'm very proud of this organization. These are people who think outside the box typically, because dissociation is not taught in schools. As a matter of fact, up here in Canada, I've talked to psychiatrists who have been instructed to ignore the chapter about dissociative disorders.
What?
Oh yeah, that's very, very common. People with dissociation and dissociative disorders get the worst treatment because it's the living face of those we disregard. They're the most abused people with really severe dissociative disorders. And the ISSTD is an organization that has seen it and tried to prove it. And it has some fantastic resources. So you can find them on the internet. My book actually describes step by step the types of meditations that I'm speaking about today. And so it sort of talks about where you start and how you go and how to move forward with the different colored images. I've written a couple, there's quite a few podcasts I have, and I've written a couple journal articles that are easy to find. They're open access if you just Google in Christine Forner. And I wrote a journal article about misogyny and why I think misogyny is here. And I think it has to do with the fact that as soon as you start to care for somebody and give them attention and kindness when they haven't had any, they're going to feel all this pain and suffering and not know where it comes from. So they're going to blame the person who's being nice. And that's just a side effect of the fact that so many of us are injured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's really important that you mentioned. I think a lot of people need to hear that right now, and kind of with the world that we live in and everything that's going down, whether you live in the United States or anywhere, we have a lot going on. And I think it's really important for so many folks that to really take a look at themselves. And what can you do to help yourself? Because unfortunately, like you said, some docs are being told to ignore certain conditions, and we all have to, do a little bit of self-advocacy here and do a little bit of the work ourselves.
Yeah. And I the thing I love about what I've discovered through meditation and understanding it the way, I started looking at human beings who were severely injured and learning, okay, why are they severely injured? This is why we're severely injured. And this is how we get better. And you start to realize actually what a magnificent creature we are. Mm-hmm. And that once you start to figure out what your body is asking for and what it needs, and figuring out how to give it what it's asking for and give it what it needs, most of it, we need profound love. We need profound tenderness. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. And once you learn how to see yourself clearly and hear yourself clearly and have agency over your feelings and understand why they're there and validity in those feelings, you start to fall in love with yourself. And it's pretty amazing to have people who are genuinely in love with themselves, not puffing themselves up to make themselves look okay so that they can get some needs met, but people who are genuinely okay with themselves on the inside and patient and tolerant. That's a really peaceful, happy person, and they're lovely to be around. And it's just much easier to be in your own skin when you're that way.
Well, one step at a time. We'll keep putting the information out to have folks work after getting their own self-love and creating that for themselves, and then they can share it with others, which is absolutely the goal. Well, Christine, thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. I think we're going to probably have a couple more conversations as time goes on, because there's so much that I have to ask. Of course, I didn't even dive into half of it, but I think you'll be a regular here on the podcast if you are up.
I would love to be here. This is lovely.
Thank you. Guess what? I have a sponsor for my podcast. It's the High Country Lodge in Breckenridge, Colorado. You can find them online at ahighcountrylodge.com. Beautiful place, can fit up to 40 people. And they have a beautiful deck, hot tub, game room in the basement, tons of trails all around. They are a quick couple-minute drive over to Breckenridge Ski Resort, couple minutes drive down to downtown. It is a great location. And the owner also offers catering. So you don't have to do anything. This is a really easy vacation to put together. Now, I have personal experience with the High Country Lodge. I love this place. The owners are my friends, and I've been there so many times. I could tell you all about it. So if you want to know, you can message me directly, and I will let you all in on the secrets of the High Country Lodge. And I highly hope that you check it out at ahighcountrylodge.com.
Subscribe, rate, and share info.